Griffin. 7. Most people don't survive one. She took 7. He looks up, eyes cold as steel. Griffin, my mother calls it divine intervention. I call it a debt, and in my family, debts are paid in full, even if I have to marry a stranger while she bleeds out on the table. Cut to black with a title card. She took 7 bullets meant for his mother. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a story of gunpowder, betrayal, and a marriage contract signed in a trauma unit. This is the saga of Griffin Devereaux and Blair Whitman. If you're ready for the twist, hit that like button. Let's begin. The wind off the harbor didn't howl. It whispered, carrying the biting chill of the Atlantic through the cracked seals of the city's oldest shipyard. But tonight, the shipyard wasn't a place of rust and labor. It had been transformed into a crystalline palace for the annual Devereaux Foundation Gala. Blair Whitman adjusted the earpiece she had been forced to wear, wincing as the static popped against her ear canal. She wasn't security, she wasn't a guest. She was the lead archivist for the city museum, contracted to ensure the priceless Roman artifacts on display. A generous loan from the Devereaux family. Didn't accidentally walk out the door in the purse of a senator's wife. Statue 3 is tilting, Blair muttered into her collar, feeling ridiculous. Someone bumped the pedestal. Copy that, Whitman. Fix it, but be invisible. The head of security barked back. Invisible. That was Blair's specialty. She wore a dress she had bought at a thrift store, a dark navy velvet that swallowed the light, allowing her to blend into the shadows between the marble columns. She moved toward the statue of Mars, stepping carefully over the thick Persian rugs layered to hide the industrial concrete floor. From across the room, Griffin Devereaux watched the movement. He didn't care about the statue. He cared about the sight lines. At 32, Griffin was the youngest head of the Devereaux crime syndicate, though the press preferred logistics magnate. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than Blair's annual salary. The fabric cut to conceal the Glock 19 nestled against his ribs. His eyes, the color of burnt umber, scanned the perimeter. He hated these events. They were a petri dish of sycophants and sharks, all smiling with porcelain veneers while waiting for a drop of blood in the water. Smile, Griffin, his mother, Elena Devereaux, murmured by his side. She was 60, but looked 40, her skin pulled tight, her neck draped in diamonds that had once belonged to a Russian Tsarina. Senator Wilkins is approaching. He controls the zoning permits for the new casino. The man is a leech, Mother, Griffin said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in his chest. He's sweating vodka. Then offer him a drink, Elena commanded, her smile never wavering. We are legitimate businessmen tonight. Griffin took a champagne flute from a passing waiter, his gaze drifting past the senator. He locked eyes with the woman by the statue, Blair. For a fraction of a second, the noise of the gala faded. She wasn't looking at him with fear or lust, the two currencies he was used to trading in. She was looking past him, up toward the mezzanine level, her brow furrowed in concentration. Blair wasn't admiring the architecture. She was looking at the ventilation duct. The dust motes dancing in the spotlight were swirling in a pattern that didn't make sense. The air handling units were off to preserve the acoustics for the orchestra. The air shouldn't be moving up there. Unless a grate had been removed, she squinted. A glint. Not a diamond. Not a sequin. It was the dull, matte reflection of a suppressor barrel catching a stray beam of stage light. The realization hit Blair like a physical blow. She looked down. Elena Devereaux was standing directly in the center of the room, raising a glass to the senator. The perfect target. Blair didn't think. Logic would have told her to scream, to run, to drop to the floor. But Blair had spent her life preserving history, protecting fragile things from destruction. In that moment, the woman in the silver gown wasn't a mafia matriarch. She was a human being standing in the path of a freight train. Blair kicked off her heels and sprinted. The orchestra was reaching a crescendo, the violins screaming. Griffin saw the woman in navy launch herself from the shadows. His hand went to his holster instinctively, thinking she was the attacker. "Get down!" Blair screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the music. She collided with Elena Devereaux just as the glass ceiling above them shattered. Thwip, thwip, thwip! The sounds were sickeningly wet, barely audible over the sudden screams of the crowd. Griffin watched in slow motion as Blair Whitman wrapped her body around his mother, twisting them both toward the floor. Blair felt the first impact in her shoulder, a burning sledgehammer. The second hit her ribs. The third, fourth, and fifth tore through the velvet of her dress like paper. She didn't feel pain yet, just the immense kinetic energy of the bullets slamming her into the hard floor. She gasped, the air leaving her lungs, replaced by the taste of copper. "Mother!" Griffin roared, vaulting over a table, his gun drawn. He landed beside the pile of silk and velvet. Elena was underneath, shocked, covered in blood that wasn't hers. But Blair was on top, her body jerking convulsively as 2 more rounds struck her back. 7 in total. Griffin looked up, firing 3 rounds toward the mezzanine, suppressing the shooter, but the assassin was already gone. He looked down. The girl, the invisible archivist, was staring up at the ceiling, her eyes losing focus. Her hand was gripping Elena's wrist so hard her knuckles were white. She shielded me," Elena whispered, her voice trembling for the first time in 20 years. "Griffin, she took them all!" Griffin holstered his weapon and dropped to his knees. He pressed his hands over the wounds on Blair's back, the hot blood oozing between his fingers, staining his cuffs. "Stay with me," Griffin commanded, his voice cracking. "You don't get to die. Not yet." Blair's lips moved. Griffin leaned in, his ear close to her mouth. "The statue!" she wheezed, blood bubbling past her lips. "Don't let them steal the statue!" Then her eyes rolled back, and the world went black. The ambulance ride was a blur of siren wails and the rhythmic compression of the EMT's hands on Blair's chest. Griffin sat in the back, refusing to leave. He wasn't just a passenger. He was the force keeping the paramedics terrified enough to work harder. "BP is dropping! 60/40! We're losing her!" the medic shouted, cutting away the ruined navy dress to reveal the devastation underneath. Griffin stared at the wounds. 7 distinct entry points. 3 in the back, 2 in the shoulder, 2 in the flank. It was a miracle her spine hadn't been severed, but the internal bleeding would be catastrophic. "Drive faster," Griffin said into his phone, speaking to the lead driver of his security convoy flanking the ambulance. "If we hit a red light, you ram the cars out of the way." He hung up and looked at Blair's pale face. She looked younger now, the tension of the gala gone, replaced by the slackness of near death. He didn't even know her name until he checked the ID badge clipped to her discarded dress. "Blair Whitman, 26 years old, archivist." "Who are you?" Griffin whispered, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek with his thumb. Why would a civilian take a clip for the devil's wife? They arrived at St. Jude's Hospital, a facility where the Devereaux Foundation had funded the entire East Wing. The trauma team was waiting. They swarmed the ambulance like white-clad locusts, pulling the stretcher out before the wheels even stopped rolling. Griffin followed them into the trauma bay, ignoring the protests of the nurses. "Sir, you can't be in here!" a doctor shouted, snapping on latex gloves. Griffin grabbed the doctor by the lapels of his scrub top, slamming him against the wall. The room went silent. "Listen to me closely," Griffin hissed, his eyes manic. "That woman is the only reason my mother is alive. If she dies, this hospital loses its funding. If she dies, I burn this city down. Do you understand?" The doctor nodded, eyes wide. Griffin released him. "Save her." Griffin retreated to the waiting room, pacing the sterile tiles like a caged tiger. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes, remembered where he was, and crushed the box in his hand. Elena Devereaux walked in 10 minutes later. She had cleaned up in the bathroom, wiping the blood from her face, but her silver dress was still ruined. She walked with the imperious grace of a queen who had just survived a coup. "Is she alive?" Elena asked, sitting down and smoothing her skirt. "In surgery. They're saying it's 50-50, Griffin said, staring out the window at the city lights. "Security missed the shooter. He was in the vents. It was an inside job, Mother. Someone gave him the schematics." "We will find them," Elena said coolly. "But first, we deal with the girl." Griffin turned to face her. "Deal with her. She saved you." "Precisely," Elena said. She opened her clutch and pulled out a slim file. "My people ran her background while you were in the ambulance. Blair Whitman, orphaned at 10, state care, put herself through college on scholarships, no debt, no family, no connections to our enemies." "She's a ghost," Griffin muttered. "She is a loose end," Elena corrected. "Or she is an asset. Think, Griffin, 7 bullets. If she survives, the press will be all over her. The heroine of the harbor. The police will question her. They will ask what she saw. They will ask why she was watching the vents. She's innocent, Mother. Innocence is a liability," Elena snapped. "If she talks to the police, she brings heat. If the rival families find out she saved me, they will finish the job to send a message. She is a target now, Griffin, because of us." Elena stood up and walked over to her son, placing a hand on his chest. There is only one way to protect her, and to protect us, Elena said softly. The law of Omerta applies to family. Only family. Griffin realized what she was suggesting. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. You want me to buy her silence? I want you to ensure her loyalty, Elena said, and her safety. If she is a Devereaux, no one touches her without declaring war on the entire organization, and she cannot testify against her husband. Griffin laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Marriage? She's unconscious, Mother. She might be dying. Then you better hurry, Elena said, her face hard as stone. The judge is already on his way. I have the papers. If she wakes up as your wife. If she dies a Devereaux, and we give her a funeral fit for a queen. Griffin looked at the double doors of the operating room. He thought of Blair's eyes, the way she had looked at him, through him, before the chaos. He thought of the weight of her blood on his hands. He owed her a life, and in the Devereaux family, the only life he had to give was his own. Call the priest too, Griffin said, buttoning his blood-stained jacket. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it right. The ICU was quiet, save for the rhythmic whoosh-click of the ventilator. Blair looked small in the bed, engulfed by tubes and wires. Her skin was the color of alabaster, almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights. It had been 6 hours of surgery. They had removed 4 bullets. 3 remained inside, too close to her spine and aorta to risk extracting. She was a ticking time bomb of lead and scar tissue. Griffin stood by the bedside. He had washed his hands, but he could still smell the iron. The judge, a man named Sterling who had been on the Devereaux payroll for 20 years, stood nervously in the corner, holding a leather folio. Griffin, Sterling whispered, this is highly irregular. She can't consent. Legally, you don't exist, Griffin cut him off, not looking away from Blair. Is the paperwork dated? I backdated it to yesterday morning, Sterling said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Before the shooting, it makes it look like a whirlwind romance, a private elopement. Good. Griffin reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't a new ring. It was a heavy, antique gold band with a dark ruby in the center. The Devereaux family ring. It was a declaration of ownership, a warning to anyone who saw it. He reached out and took Blair's left hand. It was limp, cold. Her fingers were slender, calloused slightly from handling old paper and stone. I'm sorry, Griffin whispered to the unconscious woman. I'm sorry that saving a life cost you your freedom. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too big. Do it, Griffin said to Sterling. Sterling cleared his throat, opening the book. He skipped the preamble. Do you, Griffin Alexander Devereaux, take Blair Whitman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health? I do, Griffin said, his voice dropping an octave. And do you? Sterling paused, looking at the ventilator tube taped to Blair's mouth. Do you, Blair Whitman, take Griffin? The heart monitor sped up. Beep, beep, beep. Griffin squeezed her hand. She accepts. Sterling nodded quickly, signing the document. By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. The door to the ICU room hissed open. A nurse walked in to check the vitals, stopping dead when she saw the men. Visiting hours are over, she said sternly. Who are you? Griffin turned. For the first time all night, he looked like the predator he was born to be. He held up Blair's hand, the ruby catching the light, glowing like a fresh drop of blood. I'm her husband, Griffin said, and I'm not leaving. The nurse hesitated, sensing the danger radiating off him. She checked the monitor, noted the stable rhythm, and backed out of the room. Griffin pulled a chair next to the bed and sat down. He watched the rise and fall of her chest. She was his wife now. A stranger he had married to shield her from the fallout of her own bravery. Suddenly, Blair's eyelids fluttered. The sedative was wearing off. Or perhaps the pain was breaking through. Griffin leaned forward. Blair, can you hear me? Her eyes opened. They were hazel, flecked with gold, but clouded with confusion and agony. She tried to speak, but the tube gagged her. Panic flared in her eyes. She thrashed, her hand gripping the bed rail. Shh, easy, Griffin said, putting a hand on her shoulder. You're safe. You're in the hospital. She stared at him, recognition dawning slowly. The man from the gala, the man in the tuxedo. She looked down at her hand, feeling the weight of the gold. She brought her hand up, staring at the ruby ring. She looked back at Griffin, a silent question screaming in her gaze. Griffin didn't look away. He didn't offer comfort. He offered the truth. You saved my mother, Griffin said softly. People will come for you because of that. This, he touched the ring on her finger. This is the only shield strong enough to stop them. You're Mrs. Devereaux now. Blair's eyes went wide. She shook her head weakly, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. She tried to pull the ring off, but her fingers were too weak. Don't, Griffin warned, catching her hand. Outside this room, there are wolves. I am the only monster that can keep them at bay. Wear the ring, Blair. Survive. Blair stopped fighting. The exhaustion pulled her back down. But before her eyes closed, she looked at Griffin with a clarity that unsettled him. It wasn't gratitude. It was anger. She had saved a life, and in return, he had stolen hers. The monitor beeped steadily, a metronome counting down the seconds of their new, twisted reality. Griffin sat back in the dark, watching the door, his hand resting on the gun beneath his jacket. The wedding night had begun. Consciousness didn't return all at once. It came in jagged shards of agony. Blair Whitman felt the fire in her back before she opened her eyes. It wasn't the sharp, shocking pain of the bullets anymore. It was a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to vibrate in her very marrow. She wasn't in the hospital. The air didn't smell like antiseptic and floor wax. It smelled of leather, cedar, and something metallic, like gun oil. Blair forced her eyes open. Above her was a ceiling painted with a Renaissance-style fresco of fallen angels. She blinked, trying to focus. She was lying in a bed large enough to sleep a family of 4, covered in sheets made of Egyptian cotton so high thread count they felt like water against her skin. Careful! A deep voice rumbled from the shadows. You have 30 stitches holding your back together. Sudden movements are ill-advised. Griffin Devereaux stepped into the light. He had traded the bloodied tuxedo for a charcoal gray shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked by faint, silver scars. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his amber eyes, but his gaze was as sharp as a scalpel. Where? Blair's voice was a dry croak. She tried to sit up, but a gasp of pain forced her back down. My home, Griffin said, walking over to the bedside table to pour a glass of water. He held the glass to her lips, supporting her head with a surprisingly gentle hand. The hospital was compromised. A nurse was caught trying to photograph your chart to sell to the tabloids. I moved you here 3 days ago. 3 days? Blair choked out, the water soothing her parched throat. She looked at her left hand. The heavy gold ring with the ruby was still there, weighing her down. This ring. It wasn't a dream. No, Griffin said, setting the glass down. It's a life insurance policy. Blair squeezed her eyes shut, the memory of the gala rushing back. The glint of the barrel. The shattered glass. The sensation of being punched by invisible fists. I didn't ask for this, she whispered, opening her eyes to glare at him. I saved her because it was the right thing to do. Not to be bought. You weren't bought, Blair, you were drafted, Griffin replied, his tone devoid of apology. He pulled a remote from his pocket and pressed a button. The heavy velvet curtains on the far wall slid open silently. Blair's breath hitched. They were high up. Impossibly high. The view showed the entire city skyline, glittering like a circuit board of gold and neon. They were in the penthouse of the Devereaux Tower, a fortress in the sky. Look down there, Griffin said, gesturing to the city. 3 rival families are currently tearing up the streets looking for the person who saved Elena Devereaux. They think you're a hitman from out of town. They think you're a Fed. If they find out you're just an archivist named Blair, they will torture you for days just to see if you break. You are safe here. Nowhere else. Blair stared at the city. She had spent her life invisible, cataloging history while others made it. Now, she was the center of a war. So I'm a prisoner, she said bitterly. You're a queen in a castle under siege, Griffin corrected. There is a difference. He walked to the foot of the bed. My mother's recovering in the East Wing. She wants to see you, but I told her you need rest. The doctor will be here in an hour to change your dressings. Until then, try to eat. He gestured to a silver tray on the table containing broth and crackers. Blair looked at him, really looked at him. He was handsome in a brutal architectural way, sharp angles and intense focus. But he was also a stranger who had shackled her to him while she was bleeding out. Griffin, she said, testing the name. It felt heavy on her tongue. If I'm your wife, do I get a say in my own defense? Griffin paused at the door, his hand on the brass handle. He looked back, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "The shooter," Blair said, her mind working through the haze of painkillers. "I saw something before I jumped." Griffin turned fully around. "What did you see?" "The dust," Blair said. The ventilation grate was removed, but there was no dust on the floor below it. In an old shipyard building, there's always dust. That means the grate wasn't removed that night. It was removed days before. The area was cleaned. Griffin's eyes narrowed. "Security swept the building the morning of the gala." "Then your security is either incompetent or complicit," Blair said, her voice gaining strength. "Or they didn't look up. People rarely look up. That's why cathedrals have painted ceilings, to force you to lift your head." Griffin stared at her for a long moment. A flicker of respect crossed his face. He nodded once, sharply. "Eat your soup, Mrs. Devereaux. We'll talk strategy when you can sit up without fainting." Recovery was a slow, humiliating process. For a woman used to independence, relying on nurses for everything was torture. But worse than the nurses was Griffin. He didn't delegate her care. He oversaw it. A week after waking up, Blair was allowed to sit in the armchair by the window. The doctor, a nervous man named Dr. Aris, had left supplies on the table. "I can do it myself," Blair snapped as Griffin picked up the antiseptic and fresh gauze. "You can't reach the wounds on your back," Griffin stated calmly. "And if you twist, you'll tear the stitches. Sit forward." Blair gritted her teeth but complied. She wore a silk robe that Griffin had provided, lavender, expensive and practical. She let it slide off her shoulders, clutching it to her chest as she exposed her back to him. The air in the room shifted. It became charged, heavy. Griffin looked at the map of violence on her skin. The bruises had faded to a sickly yellow-green, but the angry red lines of the incisions and the puckered bullet holes were stark against her pale skin. She was marred. Because of him. He dipped the cotton in the solution. "This will sting." He touched the wound gently. Blair hissed, her muscles tensing. "Breathe," Griffin murmured. His voice was close to her ear. "Focus on the skyline. Count the lights." "I stopped counting at 3,000, Blair muttered, gripping the armrests. Griffin worked in silence for a few minutes. His hands, usually instruments of violence or control, were surprisingly deft. He cleaned the wounds with a reverence that confused Blair. He wasn't treating her like a burden. He was treating her like a relic he had broken and was desperate to fix. "Why didn't you let me die?" Blair asked quietly, her forehead resting against the cool glass of the window. "It would have been cleaner." Griffin paused, his hand hovering over her shoulder. "My mother believes in debts. I believe in consequences. You took a bullet, 7 of them, that weren't yours. If I let you die, the universe stays unbalanced, and I hate an unbalanced ledger." "Is that all I am? An entry in a ledger?" Griffin finished taping the gauze. He pulled the robe back up over her shoulders, his fingers lingering for a split second on the nape of her neck. The touch sent a jolt of electricity down Blair's spine that had nothing to do with pain. "No," Griffin said, his voice rough. "You're the anomaly. I can predict everyone in this city. I know their price. I know their fear. But you saw a gun and ran toward it. You terrify me, Blair." He walked around the chair to face her. "And in my world, you keep the things that terrify you close, so you can watch them." Blair looked up at him. "Is that why you gave me the security files?" On the coffee table lay a stack of folders and a tablet loaded with the gala's security footage. Griffin had brought them to her yesterday after she complained of boredom. "You said my security was incompetent," Griffin said, sitting on the edge of the desk. "Prove it." Blair picked up the tablet. She swiped to a paused frame. It was grainy, taken from a camera positioned near the kitchen entrance. "Here," she pointed. "Timestamp 8:14 p.m. 10 minutes before the shooting. Look at the waiter holding the tray of champagne." Griffin leaned in, his cologne, sandalwood, and smoke filling her senses. "What about him?" "His shoes," Blair said. "Catering staff wear non-slip rubber-soled shoes, usually cheap uniform issue. This man is wearing Italian leather loafers, hand-stitched. I archived a collection of vintage footwear last year. I know the stitching." Griffin squinted. "He's a waiter. Maybe he bought nice shoes." "With a waiter's salary? Those are $800 shoes," Blair countered. "And look at his posture. He's not scanning the crowd for empty glasses. He's scanning the balcony. He's spotting for the shooter." Griffin took the tablet, zooming in. His jaw tightened. "That's Marco. He's been working our events for 2 years. "Then Marco has come into some money recently," Blair said. "Or he's been a plant for 2 years." Griffin looked at Blair, The admiration in his eyes was undisguised this time. "You noticed shoes." "Details matter, Griffin. History turns on the smallest things. A loose horseshoe nail, a wrong turn, a pair of expensive shoes." Griffin stood up abruptly, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I need to make a call. Marco is going to have a very bad night." He walked to the door but stopped. "Blair!" "Yes?" "Thank you." He left the room. Blair sat alone in the dim light, touching the spot on her neck where his fingers had grazed. She was helping him. She was helping the monster hunt. And God help her. She liked the feeling of being useful. She liked the feeling of being his partner. Even if it was just in this. 2 weeks post-shooting, Blair was walking. It was a slow, stiff shuffle, but she was mobile. Griffin insisted she join him for dinner in the main dining room. "We have a guest," Griffin had said, tossing a dress onto her bed. It wasn't thrift store velvet this time. It was emerald green silk, long-sleeved to hide her bandages, with a high neck and an open back that stopped just above her injuries. "Donovan Rhodes, the head of the Irish syndicate. He's coming to pay respects." "He's coming to see if I'm a vegetable," Blair corrected, struggling to pull the dress on. "Exactly. Show him you have teeth." The dining room was a cavernous space with a mahogany table that could seat 20. Griffin sat at the head. Blair sat to his right. Opposite them sat Donovan Rhodes, a man with a shock of red hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold, blue eyes. The tension was palpable. The air felt thin like ozone before a lightning strike. "The roast is excellent, Griffin," Donovan said, slicing his meat with aggressive precision. "And your bride. She is a vision. A miracle, truly. 7 bullets? I heard it was a closed casket situation." "You hear a lot of things, Donovan," Griffin said, sipping his wine. "Most of them are wrong." Donovan turned his gaze to Blair. He looked her up and down, lingering on the high collar of her dress. "And what does the lovely Mrs. Devereaux do? Before she became a human shield, that is. Were you a model? A dancer?" It was a test. He was probing for weakness, for a lack of pedigree. "I was an archivist," Blair said, her voice steady. She picked up her wineglass, noting the slight tremor in her hand, and willing it to stop. "An archivist?" Donovan laughed. "Dusty books and dead people, how boring!" "On the contrary," Blair smiled, though it felt tight. "History is instructive. It teaches us how empires fall." Donovan stopped chewing. "Is that so?" "Yes," Blair continued, locking eyes with him. "For example, the Roman Empire didn't fall because of external invasion. It fell because of internal corruption, overextended borders, and allies who smiled to Caesar's face while sharpening knives behind his back." The silence in the room was deafening. Griffin watched Blair, his face impassive, but his hand tightened around his glass. She was baiting a tiger. Donovan put his fork down. The jovial mask slipped. "Are you implying something, Mrs. Devereaux?" "I'm just making conversation about history, Mr. Rhodes," Blair said innocently. "But it is interesting. I noticed your cufflinks." Donovan frowned, looking at his wrists. He wore gold cufflinks, shaped like Celtic knots. "They are quite distinct," Blair said. "Mid-20th century design. I saw a similar pair in a photograph recently. In the file of a man named Marco." Donovan froze. Griffin went perfectly still. Blair didn't look at Griffin. She kept her eyes on Donovan. "Marco had a photo in his apartment. We found it during the sweep. He was wearing those exact cufflinks. A gift, perhaps? From a generous patron?" It was a bluff. Blair hadn't seen the photo. She had seen Marco's file, yes, but the detail about the cufflinks was a gamble. She had noticed Donovan twisting them nervously when he first walked in. She was betting on a connection. Donovan's face turned a shade of purple. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I came here to offer peace," Donovan spat, "not to be interrogated by a librarian." "Sit down, Donovan," Griffin said. His voice was quiet, deadly. He placed a handgun on the table. It was a heavy, matte black pistol. Donovan looked at the gun, then at the guard standing by the doors. He sat down slowly. "My wife has a sharp eye," Griffin said, a dark smile playing on his lips. "If she says she saw a connection, I believe her. Did you pay Marco to open the vent, Donovan?" "I don't know any Marco," Donovan denied, but sweat was beading on his forehead. "Lying to a historian is useless," Blair said softly. "The past always leaves a trail." Griffin stood up. "Get out. If I see you in my city again, I won't send a dinner invitation. I'll send a hearse." Donovan scrambled up and stormed out, his entourage trailing behind him. When the door clicked shut, Griffin turned to Blair. He looked shocked. "Did you really see the cufflinks in Marco's file?" he asked. Blair exhaled, her adrenaline crashing. She slumped slightly in her chair. "No, I saw him fiddling with them. He looked guilty. I took a guess." Griffin stared at her, then threw his head back and laughed. It was a genuine, deep laugh that startled the servants. "You bluffed a warlord," Griffin said, shaking his head. "And you won." He walked over to her, extending his hand. "Come, you need to rest. You're pale." Blair took his hand. He pulled her up but didn't let go immediately. He pulled her a fraction of an inch closer. "You are dangerous, Blair," he whispered. "I think I might keep you." "I thought I was already kept," Blair replied, challenging him. "Before you were a liability," Griffin said, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Tonight you were a Devereaux." For the first time, the name didn't feel like a curse. It felt like armor. And as Blair walked back to her gilded cage, leaning on the arm of the devil she had married, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't just surviving the game. She was starting to learn how to play it. The adrenaline from the dinner with Donovan Rhodes had faded, leaving Blair exhausted but mentally wired. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the muzzle flash from the gala. It was 3 a.m. The penthouse was silent, save for the hum of the city below. Griffin was asleep in the master suite, or pretending to be. Blair sat in the library, a massive room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves that smelled of old paper and dust. It was the only room in the fortress that felt like her natural habitat. She had the tablet with the security files open again. Something about the Marco revelation was gnawing at her. Donovan's reaction had been genuine fear, not guilt. He hadn't hired Marco. So who had? Blair pulled up the timeline of the gala again. She cross-referenced the guest list with the staff logs. She was looking for patterns, the kind she used to find in ancient shipping manifests to track smuggling routes. "You're obsessing," a voice said from the doorway. Blair didn't jump. She was getting used to Griffin's silent approach. He was wearing silk pajama pants and nothing else, the scar on his shoulder visible in the dim light of the library lamp. "I'm working," Blair corrected, not looking up. "Donovan didn't do it. He was too surprised about the cufflinks. He's a thug, not an actor." Griffin walked into the room, pouring himself a bourbon from the crystal decanter on the desk. "I know. Donovan is a hammer. The hit at the gala was a scalpel. Precise. Expensive." "So who holds the scalpel?" Blair asked, turning the tablet to face him. "Look at this. Marco's bank records. I dug a little deeper into the shell company that paid him. It's not registered in Ireland, Donovan's turf. It's registered here, in the city." Griffin frowned, leaning over her shoulder. The heat of his bare chest radiated against her back, distracting her for a split second. "The shell company is Janus Holdings. Never heard of it." "Janus," Blair murmured. "The Roman god of beginnings, transitions, and duality. Two faces." She tapped the screen. "I searched the public records for Janus Holdings. The incorporation papers were filed 3 years ago. The notary stamp belongs to a clerk who works exclusively for one firm, Wilkins and Associates." Griffin went still. The glass in his hand threatened to shatter. "Senator Wilkins?" "The man your mother was toasting when the bullets started flying," Blair said, her voice chillingly calm. "He was standing right next to her. But if you watch the footage..." She played the clip. The senator, sweating vodka as Griffin had described, took a half step back just seconds before the glass shattered. He didn't look up. He looked away. "He moved out of the splash zone," Griffin whispered, his eyes darkening to obsidian. "He knew. He wanted your mother dead to clear the zoning obstacles," Blair deduced. "But he needed it to look like a gang war. That's why he hired a shooter to make it messy. If Elena dies, the city cracks down on the syndicates, and Wilkins sweeps in as the law and order hero to seize the waterfront." Griffin set the glass down with a clink that sounded like a gunshot. "He was in my house. He drank my wine, and he paid a man to put 7 bullets in my wife. Technically, he paid a man to put them in your mother. I just got in the way," Blair pointed out. "It's the same thing now," Griffin growled. He turned toward the door, his body radiating a terrifying kinetic energy. "I'm going to pay the senator a visit. Tonight." "No," Blair said, standing up. The sudden movement pulled at her stitches and she winced, clutching her side. Griffin stopped instantly, rushing to her side to steady her. "Sit down. You're hurting yourself." I'm fine, Blair gasped, gripping his forearm. But you can't just go kill a senator, Griffin. He's a public figure. If you kill him, the feds will descend on this city like locusts. You'll lose everything. The business, the tower, your mother. He tried to kill my family, Griffin snarled, his face inches from hers. I don't care about the consequences. I do, Blair shouted back. I didn't take 7 bullets so you could throw your life away in a fit of rage. Think, Griffin. Use the brain that built this empire, not the gun. Griffin stared at her, his chest heaving. The rage was slowly receding, replaced by a calculating intensity. He looked at her hand, still gripping his arm. What do you suggest, Mrs. Devereaux? He asked, his voice low. Janus, Blair said, her eyes gleaming. 2 faces. We don't kill him. We expose the other face. We destroy his reputation, his legacy, his career. We make him wish he was dead. And then, well, history is full of accidents. Griffin looked at her with a mixture of awe and hunger. He raised his hand and cupped her cheek. You are terrifying, he whispered. I'm learning, Blair whispered back. Suddenly, the lights in the penthouse flickered and died. The smart home system gave a low electronic groan and shut down. The electronic locks on the library door clicked open, a default safety failure mode. The room was plunged into darkness, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the high windows. Griffin, Blair whispered. Get down, Griffin commanded, pushing her behind the heavy oak desk. He produced a gun from a hidden holster beneath the desk ledge, a weapon Blair hadn't even known was there. The power cut wasn't an accident, Griffin said into the silence. The security grid is down. We have company. The silence of the penthouse was broken by the soft, rhythmic thud of suppressed footsteps on the marble floor of the foyer. How many? Blair whispered, crouching behind the desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. 4, maybe 5, Griffin murmured, checking the magazine of his pistol. Professional. They bypassed the biometric scanners at the elevator. That means they have a key. Wilkins. He knew Blair and Griffin were onto him. Or maybe he just wanted to finish the job he started at the gala. We can't stay here, Griffin said. This room has 1 exit. If they breach the door, we're cornered. The service lift? Blair asked. Disabled with the power. The balcony? Sniper bait. Blair looked around the library. It was modeled after the 19th century reading rooms she adored. And 19th century architects loved secrets. Griffin, Blair hissed. The fireplace. Griffin looked at the massive stone hearth. It's gas. The flue is too small. Not the flue, Blair said, crawling toward the built-in bookshelves next to the mantel. This building, the Devereaux Tower, it was built on top of the old Prohibition-era Grand Hotel, right? Yes, my grandfather renovated it. He didn't renovate everything, Blair said, running her fingers along the molding of the shelf. I saw the original blueprints in the city archives years ago. There was a dumbwaiter system for smuggling liquor during the raids. It ran from the penthouse suite down to the sub-basement laundry. That was 80 years ago, Blair. It's been walled up. Architects don't destroy structural voids. They cover them, Blair insisted. She found a discrepancy in the wood paneling. A hollow sound. Help me move this bookcase. Now. Griffin didn't argue. He holstered his weapon and put his shoulder to the heavy mahogany unit. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They shoved. The wood groaned, sliding across the floor to reveal a panel of drywall that looked slightly different from the rest. Griffin kicked it. The plaster crumbled, revealing a dark, dusty shaft with a rusted iron ladder and a pulley system. The liquor chute, Griffin breathed. Bang! The library doors exploded inward. Splinters of wood showered the room. Go! Griffin shouted, shoving Blair toward the hole. Blair scrambled into the shaft, the smell of 80-year-old dust filling her lungs. She found footing under the rusted rungs. Griffin squeezed in behind her, pulling the bookcase back as best he could just as flashlights swept the room. Clear! A voice shouted from the library. Check the bedroom! They descended into the darkness. It was a tight squeeze. Blair's back screamed in protest, every rung a jolt of agony to her healing wounds. But she bit her lip until it bled, refusing to make a sound. They climbed down 3 floors until they reached a service hatch that opened into a maintenance closet on the 40th floor. They tumbled out onto the concrete floor, gasping for air. Are you okay? Griffin asked, checking her bandages immediately. A spot of fresh red was blooming on the green silk of her dress. I'm fine, Blair lied, her face pale. We need to get to the security room on this floor. We can reboot the system and lock them in the penthouse. No, Griffin said, his eyes cold. We're not locking them in. We're hunting them down. He helped her stand. Stay here. Lock the door. No. Blair grabbed his arm again. You can't go back up there alone. They have tactical gear. You have a pistol and pajama pants. I have the element of surprise, Griffin said. And I have the blueprints, Blair countered. Griffin, the fire suppression system, it's halon gas in the server room next to the library. If we trigger the emergency overpressure from down here... Griffin looked at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. We can flush them out. Like rats, Blair finished. They moved to the end of the hall to the breaker box. Blair identified the HVAC controls. If I reverse the intake flow and trigger the halon release, the library becomes a gas chamber. Not lethal, but it will suck the oxygen out of the room in 10 seconds. They'll pass out. Do it, Griffin commanded. Blair yanked the lever. Somewhere far above them, a hydraulic hiss echoed through the ductwork. Griffin checked his watch. 30 seconds. Stay here. This time, he didn't wait for permission. He moved toward the stairwell, moving like a shadow. Blair waited in the dark, counting the seconds. She felt a strange calm. A month ago, she was cataloging pottery shards. Now she was gassing hitmen in a skyscraper. 10 minutes later, Griffin returned. He was carrying a tactical rifle he had taken from one of the men. There was a smear of blood on his cheek, but he looked unhurt. It's done, he said. 4 men, unconscious. Security team is on the way up to collect the garbage. He walked over to Blair and dropped the rifle. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. They were in our home, he whispered against her skin. They were looking for you. They didn't find me, Blair said, holding him tight, ignoring the pain in her back. Because I know this building better than they do. Griffin pulled back, looking into her eyes. The intensity of his gaze was scorching. You are not just an archivist, Blair, he said roughly. You are the queen of this damn tower. He kissed her then. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, possessed, a claiming of life in the face of death. Blair kissed him back, tasting the bourbon and the violence, realizing that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. She belonged to this world now. The Senator's Charity Ball for Urban Renewal was the social event of the season. It was held in the grand ballroom of the City Hall, a venue screaming with pretension. Senator Wilkins stood at the podium, basking in the applause of the city's elite. We must cleanse our streets of the criminal element, Wilkins bellowed into the microphone. We must tear down the old corrupt structures and build a future of light. The doors at the back of the room swung open. The applause faltered. Heads turned. A murmur rippled through the crowd like a wave. Griffin Devereaux walked in. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. On his arm was Blair Devereaux. She wore a gown of deep crimson, the color of fresh blood. It was backless, revealing the faint, jagged lines of the scars that crisscrossed her spine. She wore them not with shame, but as a declaration. The ruby ring on her finger flashed under the chandeliers. They walked down the center aisle. The crowd parted. Security guards stepped forward but hesitated when they saw the press cameras flashing. They couldn't throw out the city's biggest donors without a scene. Senator Wilkins froze at the podium. His smile twitched. Senator, Griffin said, his voice carrying effortlessly to the stage. Lovely speech, very inspiring. Mr. Devereaux, Wilkins stammered, this is a private event. Oh, I have a ticket, Griffin said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. Actually, I have a donation. He stepped up to the stage, Blair right beside him. Up close, Wilkins looked small. He looked at Blair's scars, and for a moment, terror flashed in his eyes. You, Wilkins whispered, you should be dead. I have a very good doctor, Blair said, her voice amplified by the microphone as she leaned in. And a very protective husband. Griffin handed the envelope to the senator. A contribution to your retirement fund. Wilkins opened the envelope. Inside was not a check. It was a single photograph. The photo Blair had found, showing Wilkins meeting with the shooter, and a bank transfer receipt from Janus Holdings to the shooter's account, authorized by Wilkins' personal biometric key. Wilkins went pale. You can't prove this, he hissed. We don't have to prove it in court, Senator, Blair said softly, so only he could hear. We just gave copies to every journalist in this room, and to the FBI field office. They're waiting in the lobby. Wilkins looked out at the crowd. The journalists were checking their phones. A buzz of shock was starting to rise. The flashbulbs were popping faster now, blinding him. Why? Wilkins whispered, defeated. Why didn't you just kill me? Griffin leaned in, his lips brushing the senator's ear. Because my wife insisted on mercy. She thought prison would be more educational for you. Personally, I wanted to throw you off the roof. Griffin stepped back, taking Blair's hand. Ladies and gentlemen, Griffin addressed the room. Please enjoy the evening. The senator was just leaving. As if on cue, the doors opened again. Agents and FBI windbreakers marched in. Wilkins slumped against the podium. Griffin and Blair didn't watch the arrest. They turned and walked out the way they came, hand in hand, moving through the sea of stunned elites. Outside, the air was crisp and cold. The night was clear, no rain, just the endless, uncaring stars. They stood on the steps of City Hall. Griffin looked at Blair. The crimson dress, the scars, the head held high. It's over, Griffin said. The debt is paid. Not yet, Blair said. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. You married me to protect me. You saved me. The debt is settled. She began to pull the heavy ruby ring off her finger. Griffin's hand shot out, stopping her. His grip was firm, desperate. Keep it, he said. Griffin, the contract. Burn the contract, Griffin said. I don't want a contract, I want you. He stepped closer, invading her space, shielding her from the wind. You took 7 bullets for my family, but you saved me, Blair. You saved me from becoming just another butcher in a suit. You make me see the things I missed. He kissed her hand, right over the ruby. Don't leave, he whispered. Rule with me. Blair looked at the city skyline, the kingdom of glass and steel that Griffin controlled. It was a dangerous world, a world of wolves. But looking at the man in front of her, she realized she wasn't the prey anymore. She slid the ring back down to the base of her finger. Okay, Blair said, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. But we're redecorating the penthouse. The fallen angel fresco has to go. Griffin laughed, the sound echoing into the night. Anything you want, Mrs. Devereaux, anything you want. And that, my friends, is the story of how a librarian took 7 bullets and ended up owning the city. From a tragic victim to a mafia queen, Blair Whitman didn't just survive the underworld. She archived it, analyzed it, and conquered it. What did you think of the twist with the senator? And that scene in the elevator shaft? If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments. Would you have forgiven Griffin for dragging you into his world, or would you have taken the ring and run? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.